Problem of evil. As we will see, the problem of evil is the greatest challenge to the existence of God, or point number 3 in the 12 points that show Christianity is true. Our objectives. 1. You should be able to recognize that evil does not negate the existence of God. And 2. Recognize that evil does not negate the perfections of God. While the answers that are given here assume theism, that is point number 3, that the existence of God has already been demonstrated, it does not involve the assumption of Christianity. Indeed, if Christianity is true, we may certainly gain further insight regarding the problem of evil than what is presented here. If God, why evil? Why do we need to approach or answer this particular problem with respect to point number 3 in the 12 points that show Christianity is true? Well, the reason is because pantheism affirms God but no evil, and atheism affirms evil but no God. And it is only theism that affirms both God and evil. And the problem of evil is the greatest problem to the theistic worldview. It is the most severe charge leveled against theism. History testifies to the number of people who have become agnostic or atheist as a result of this problem. Hence, it is upon the apologist to deal with this problem in making a case for theism or Christianity. And it's also important to point out that we do not beg the question of God's existence in our approach to answering this question. If there is no God, then there is no problem of inconsistency between God and evil. Only if we did not allow for the problem would we be begging the question. There is an important distinction to make between contradiction versus inconsistency. To illustrate this, consider the statements, all politicians are honest, and some politicians are not honest. This, as we have learned from point number 1 and 2, is a contradiction. That is, we are affirming at the same time and in the same sense something and its opposite, namely all politicians are honest and some politicians are not honest. Hence, this is formally a contradiction. But consider this, Dr. Potter is poor, and Dr. Potter has $1 million. This indeed may seem to be a mystery to us. How have I come to have $1 million and also at the same time be poor? And perhaps this could be clarified by what we mean by $1 million. Perhaps I only have $1 million of Monopoly money after winning a Monopoly tournament. This would resolve these two statements. Hence, these kinds of statements would just be considered inconsistent. It would not be a contradiction. And when we consider the problem of evil, this is exactly what we have, an inconsistency and not a contradiction. God, in accordance with his nature, would abolish evil, and evil exists. So the question then becomes, how do we reconcile this inconsistency? Hence, the question now is, how do we reconcile this inconsistency, as it is not a contradiction? Hence, because it is not a contradiction, now we are in a position to show possible ways to reconcile. Our reconciliation may certainly leave us wanting more, but this is not a contradiction. In fact, the medieval theologian Thomas Aquinas presented an answer to this question, does evil mean God does not exist? His objection, it seems that God does not exist, because if one of two contraries be infinite, the other would be altogether destroyed. But the word God means that he is infinite goodness. If therefore God existed, there would be no evil discoverable. but there is evil in the world. Therefore, God does not exist. Aquinas' objection should be understood in the context of him already having established the existence of God. Hence, part of his answer is to actually quote another medieval theologian, Augustine, who says, since God is the highest good, he would not allow any evil to exist in his works, unless his omnipotence and goodness were such as to bring good even out of evil. This is part of the infinite goodness of God, that he should allow evil to exist and out of it produce good. Hence, our demonstration of God and God's goodness is not negated by the presence of evil. Sometimes philosophically, this is termed a theodicy. A theodicy is a justification of God or an explanation of the compatibility of God and evil. Our outline that we will follow is to first consider the metaphysical problem of evil. Here we will cover the nature of evil and the origin of evil. Then we will turn to the moral and physical problem of evil. Here we will cover the persistence of evil, the avoidability of evil, and the purpose of evil. Finally, we will answer a few objections. First of all, what is evil? Some have argued God is the author of everything. Evil is something. Therefore, God is the author of evil. Given that as theists, we must reject dualism, that is, evil is something that is infinite or eternal on par with God, and we reject illusionism, that is, the pantheistic view that says evil is not real, it's just an illusion. What is our solution? We certainly cannot deny the first premise. God is the author of everything. For our argument for the existence of God has shown that he brings everything into existence. If we were to deny premise 1, we would be denying theism, and it would seem that we cannot deny evil is something because we have rejected pantheism, that it is an illusion. Hence the conclusion follows, therefore God is the author of evil. But there is a solution to point out, and it was the work of St. Augustine in 400 AD that gave an answer for us in pointing out that evil is not a thing, but it is a corruption in a thing. So our solution is to, one, fix that God only creates substances. And evil is not a substance. Evil is not a thing. So we reject premise 2. Evil is not a created thing. Hence, if it's not a thing, then the argument does not follow. Evil is not a thing or a substance in and of itself. Rather, it is a corruption in or of good things. It is a privation. Something should be there, but it's not. Such as blindness to a person. A person should be able to see, and if they can't see, we say they're blind, because sight is absent from the person when it should be there. Evil is like rot to a tree, where the tree should not be rotted out. In other words, there must first be something that is good which is present, in order to then have evil present. There's no such thing as a totally evil thing. Evil is like rust is to a car. So we are denying that evil is a substance. There are no pure, all evil things. Nothing is metaphysically evil. Evil is not a thing, but a lack in things. It is a corruption of good substances. Evil is a real lack in good things, and an absence of a thing that ought to be there, as rust is to a car or rot is to a tree, as a wound is to an arm, or moth holes are to a garment. Evil can only exist in something as a corruption of what ought to be there. As Augustine of Hippo says, if after the evil is removed, the nature remains in a purer state, and does not remain at all when a good is taken away, it must be good, which makes the nature of the thing what it is, while the evil is not nature, but contrary to nature. No nature, as far as it is nature, is evil, but to each nature there is no evil except to be diminished in respect of good. Augustine is saying that evil has no positive nature or essence or a thing, what something is, but evil is a loss of good, and the loss of good in something that should be there has received the name of evil. Thomas Aquinas says, but what is evil is a privation. In this sense, blindness means the privation of sight. A thing is called evil for lacking a perfection it ought to have. To lack sight is an evil in man, but not in a stone. Aquinas points out here that not every absence of a good is an evil. Evil denotes the lack of a good that should be there. Sight should be there for a human being, and the lack of sight, the lack of the perfection of sight, constitutes an evil. But with stones or rocks, of which their nature is not to be able to see, the lack of sight for a stone or a rock does not entail an evil. It is the nature of human beings to have sight or to see, but it is not of the nature of stones or rocks to be able to see. The origin of evil. Where did evil come from? Some will argue God is absolutely perfect. God cannot create anything imperfect, but perfect creatures cannot do evil. Therefore, evil cannot arise in such a world. Hence it is argued because evil did arise, something is wrong. Hence it is charged against theism. Either one, God is absolutely perfect is wrong, or two, God cannot create anything imperfect. And certainly a perfect creature created by God cannot do evil. So hence, where does evil come from? The solution is to affirm premise one, God is absolutely perfect. And two, God created only perfect creatures. But it's here we must identify that one perfection God gave some creatures, rational creatures, was that of free choice, to do other than they desire. And by free choice, these creatures brought evil. Therefore, a perfect creature caused evil, hence relieving God of the origin of evil. God made all creatures good. Some creatures became evil by free choice. So what is the source of human freedom? God produces the fact of free choice. God holds in existence human free choice and ensures that it is a free choice. But humans perform the act of free choice. Hence, God is responsible for creating the possibility of evil. Humans are responsible for the actuality of evil. God is free, but cannot do evil because he cannot change, and he is perfect. Man is free and can do evil because he can change. God's creation of man produced the possibility of evil, but man performed the acts of freedom that resulted in the actuality of evil. Hence, creatures make and do evil acts. Augustine again says, God judged that men would serve him better if they served him freely. That could not be if they served by necessity and not by free will. Hence, free will is the key to understanding where evil comes from and how God does not directly cause evil, but only creates the possibility of evil. So why does God allow evil? It's our skeptic David Hume that made the famous argument this way. If God is all good, he would destroy evil. If God is all powerful, he could destroy evil. But evil is not destroyed. Therefore, there is no such God. Note here that this is not an argument against the existence of God. It's simply against an all-good God and an all-powerful God that, of course, theism affirms. In his own words, David Hume said, "Is he willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he is impotent. Is he able but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Whence then is evil?" This is perhaps the strongest argument against God or against theism in its concept of God. If Hume is right, then theism is wrong. This, of course, as I pointed out, does not eliminate God, just the theistic conception of God. And this argument has led many to a finite conception of God, thinking him unable to be either all good, all powerful, or both. The solution to this: certainly, as theists, we cannot reject the fact that God is all good and all powerful. But it is indeed these attributes of God that brings us to the solution. God is all good and therefore desires to defeat evil. It is his nature to defeat it. God is all powerful and is able to defeat evil, since there is nothing he lacks in the power to be able to defeat it. But evil is not yet defeated. In fact, it is premise 3 where Hume and other skeptics would actually have to be God to know that their premise is true. Evil is not defeated, that God will never defeat evil. Since evil is not yet defeated, God's attributes of being all good and all powerful lead us to understand that eventually evil will and must be defeated because of God's nature. And we also have to point out that in Hume's argument, the term destroy is ambiguous. God could destroy evil now, but would also destroy all freedom and destroy all goods related to freedom. That would in and of itself be an evil act if God were to do it. If one means by destroy to simply defeat evil, that is to separate good from evil, to be victorious over evil, then God must do that without destroying free will. Evil cannot be destroyed without destroying freedom. Love is the greatest good of free creatures, but love is impossible without freedom. So, to destroy freedom would not be the greatest good. So, we correct it by asserting premise 3, evil is not yet defeated, which of course one can only know it will never be defeated, if indeed they know everything like God. And as C.S. Lewis points out in Mere Christianity, evil points to God. Lewis says, "My argument against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. Thus, in the very act of trying to prove that God did not exist, in other words, that the whole of reality was senseless, I found I was forced to assume that one part of reality, namely my idea of justice, was full of sense." Atheists can't press this too hard or it turns around on them, like it did for Lewis. To point out some things good and some things evil, or to point out that some things are just and other things are unjust, points to absolute goodness or absolute justice. Hence, this argument cannot be used to show that God does not exist. So why did God create if he knew evil would result? Some reason this way. If God is free, he could have avoided this evil world. If he is all good, he would not have desired this evil world. But God has permitted this evil world. Therefore, no such God exists. The solution is to note that if God chooses to create it, that is the world, then this must be a good world. For a perfect being cannot create an imperfect world. This is a morally good world. Therefore, in creating this world, God did good, not evil. To see the force of this, it's important to recognize the different options with regards to God creating the world. What we're affirming here in this solution is that no other world achievable is morally better than the one God made, that is, one in which humans are free and some are saved. Compared to the options, this is the best world achievable. 1. God could have created no world at all, but a non-existent world is not morally better than this one. God could have created no world with free creatures, but a non-free world is not morally better than this one. 3. God could have created free creatures who would not do evil. While a world with no evil or unsaved persons is logically possible, it is not actually attainable, since some freely choose to be lost. And 4, God could have created free creatures who would do evil but would all be saved. Even if this were achievable, it would not be morally desirable, since the doing of evil is free and the choosing of salvation is free. Hence, it follows this is the best achievable world given free will. And ultimately, we can say it is the best way to the best possible world given the necessity of free will. So while we can say this is not the best possible world, it is the best way to the best possible world given the necessity of free will. What about evil that has no purpose? Indeed, children may suffer needlessly. Tsunamis and earthquakes may kill thousands of people. So it is argued, an all good God must have a good purpose for everything. There is no good purpose for some suffering. Therefore, there cannot be an all good God. The solution: God must have a good purpose for everything. Some good purposes have evil byproducts. Therefore, some evil is a byproduct of good purposes. Given God's nature, we must conclude this. Just because we do not know a good purpose for evil does not mean there is none. Just because finite minds can't think of an answer as to why something happens does not mean that an infinite mind cannot have a reason or a purpose for why it happens. Some good processes have evil byproducts. For example, higher forms of life depend on lower forms of life. The early bird gets the worm, but the early worm gets eaten. God has created an interdependent natural world that is a suitable place for rational creatures, such as human beings, to live and survive in. And since we are finite and not God, we must rest and be comforted by the fact that God is all-knowing and all-good and all-powerful. Hence, there is comfort in knowing who does know why certain things happen, and the fact that I know why I don't know why. We should rest in good reasons for believing God exists, good reasons for believing He has an answer, even though we do not. And there is an important clarification to make. Not every specific event must have a good purpose. It could just be contributing to a general good purpose overall. Fire or water, in general, has a good purpose, but not every spark has a good purpose, such as igniting an unintended fire, or water resulting in the drowning of someone. God is able to bring much good out of unintended evils, saving a drowning victim, for example, or putting out a fire. This world is not the best of all possible worlds, yet God has made it the best possible way to attain His ultimate goal of bringing a greater good out of allowing evil. An all-knowing God knows everything. Finite creatures do not know everything. Hence, God knows what we do not know. And an all-good God has a good purpose for all evil, even if we do not know what it is. Indeed, us not knowing may itself be part of God's good purpose, given that we do not know some purposes for evil. As C.S. Lewis said in his book, The Problem of Pain, God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. It is his megaphone to arouse a deaf world. Some objections to answer. First, how do we explain natural disasters that seem unconnected to free will? Our response: all physical evil, all natural evil, is in some way, directly or indirectly, connected to the preserving of free will. That is, a necessary byproduct of preserving free will is having a natural or physical world necessary to maintaining this end. Hence, it is having a physical world, a natural world, is necessary to maintaining the existence of free, rational creatures. And it's also important to point out that with regards to the physical world, the natural world, there are good natural byproducts for every so-called disaster. Cold and hot air mix for a thunderstorm that produces lightning, which produces nitric oxide that fertilizes plants and crops to grow so that humans can survive. Earthquakes relieve internal pressure to balance the forces needed to keep oceans and mountains in place and prevent the earth from exploding. Floods, droughts, tornadoes could all be necessary byproducts of a physical world, which are necessary to morally achieve the best of all possible worlds. And there should be no shame in pleading some things we just don't know why they happen. But a theistic worldview allows us to say, we do not know, but we indeed do know who knows, which of course is God. Having a regular, predictable, physical or natural world allows for the regularity of processes which allow me to actually do good, to give a drink of water to a thirsty person. And the same natural processes that allow me to do good are the ones that lead to human suffering. For example, if a person drowns in water. A rational animal, such as a human being, is best suited in a world that has natural, regular processes that allows them to grow in knowledge and improve morally. We are best suited in a world that is like this than any other world. Why so much evil or unequal distribution of evil? Some will ask and complain, could we not just have one little bit less of evil in the world to make this a better world? To this we answer, it is impossible to quantify evil, since no one human experiences the totality of all human pain and evil. This again would require us to be in the category of being God himself to even quantify evil or see its unequal distribution. We're not in the position to make that judgment. To what other world do we have to compare its amount? Given God's nature, we should assume that God allows only the evil that is necessary to achieve the best way to the best of all possible worlds. It is only necessary for theism to demonstrate that more good than evil results from permitting freedom. Tied to the existence of an all-good God is that he will not permit more evil than is necessary to achieve the best of all possible worlds. So why doesn't God do miracles to prevent some or all evil? Dr. Geiser, in his book, If God, Why Evil, responds to this in saying, without the regularity of nature, moral decisions are impossible and moral improvement cannot occur. Both of these are necessary to producing the best of all possible worlds. Since all life depends on the regularity of nature, it must be kept intact. If God stopped all free thoughts and actions by not allowing them to materialize, he would be negating the very freedom he granted and making this a free moral world with free moral creatures. And indeed, we can add to this that God has indeed miraculously intervened into the world in order to prevent some and perhaps a lot of evil. He has done this and explained this in the Bible through his Son, Jesus Christ, and the Christian faith, which of course we have defended using the 12 points that show Christianity is true. In conclusion, we should remember, evil is not a thing in itself, but a lack or privation in otherwise good things. Evil is the result of bad human choices or suffering from the natural operation of the world that is required to maintain free will. Evil does not entail the non-existence of God. Evil does not remove the all-perfect nature of God. Evil will be defeated and quarantined one day because God is all-powerful and all-good.